Hi, I'm Pamela Wallin, and welcome to No Nonsense. Today, a conversation in this episode about COVID, what else, and how we are going to deal with this as time unfolds. Will there be a vaccine? Are we going to find treatments, etc.? Dr. Volker Gerdts, I'm not saying that just right. You say it for me.
Gerdts.
Gerdts. Right. Okay, that's pretty close. So he is the director and CEO of VIDO InterVac. He's a research scientist. The University of Saskatchewan's Vaccine and Infectious Disease Organization, International Vaccine Center, VIDO InterVac, that's what that means, works with partners around the world to study human and animal diseases and solutions. So you're the guy kind of leading the charge here in Saskatchewan to try and find a vaccine. How does that come about? Is that part of your own work history?
Yeah, so I've, all my life, I've worked on vaccines for both animals and humans. And really, that's what VIDO InterVac is all about. We are here to help the country dealing with emerging diseases, and we're happy to do that for COVID-19 right now.
And how did this happen? Did you just obviously, when the disease broke out, did you say this is our job? Or did Ottawa come to you and say, work on this? Or how does it work?
Yeah, so we keep monitoring emerging diseases when they arise around the world. So there's networks that monitor these new diseases. And when this one came up and the WHO beginning of January confirmed that there was a new disease, I phoned Dr. Matt Gilmer, who at that time was the scientific general director for the National Microbiology Lab in Winnipeg, and said, Matt, this might be a big one. We're here to help. If there is anything we can do, let us know. And since then, he and I spoke essentially every second day or third day on our cell phones, mostly at night, checking in, seeing if we can help each other. And then as soon as it became clear and the sequence was published, so the genome of the virus was published, we started to design our vaccine. In fact, that same afternoon, we had our vaccine already designed.
Wow.
And then it took us about 4.5 weeks to generate a vaccine, to assemble it, to make it in the lab. And as soon as we had enough material available, we injected it into animals to start the testing. And so VIDO InterVac was the first in Canada to isolate the virus, the first to establish an animal model for it, and then the first also to test the vaccine.
So a couple of things. I don't want to live in your head. I can't imagine when you see all these things in the world, like you must be the guy when somebody says, what keeps you up at night? You're the one that says new diseases.
That's right.
And you see them and you live in that scientific world, so you're hearing about it in a different way and on a different level.
Yeah. And so we've been telling government and others for many, many years now that when the next pandemic comes, the consequences could be catastrophic. And now we're experiencing it. But these diseases happen all the time. We just before COVID-19, there was a disease in animals, in pigs, called African swine fever, also in China, and it's scheduled to kill every third pig on this planet. It has huge consequences for the global protein industry, for the pig industry, and it's probably the largest threat to Canada's pork industry since, 200 years.
And where is it?
It's right now in China. It's going around like wildfire. China, Thailand, Korea, Vietnam. It's all over the place. Vaccines are now becoming available or in development. It's a disease that's well known, but largely ignored. Mm-hmm. And we don't have it in North America, but that's,
Touchwood.
In the global world, that's the biggest issue. And that's what we keep telling people. Like just, another pig disease about 6 years ago, it came into North America, within 10 months had killed 10 million pigs. Yeah. No vaccine available. VIDO was the first in Canada and second in North America to make a vaccine for it. That's what our job is. That's what we're here for. When these diseases emerge, we try to come up with solutions for it.
The other frustrating thing for you must be that the media, the public, gloms on to certain diseases and ignores others. And COVID-19 kind of was one of those ones where everybody jumped on the bandwagon. We've lived through SARS and some other things. It was never a response like this. Shut everything down, lock yourself indoors. It seemed extreme, but necessary. How do you look at that?
So I think in the beginning, we all didn't know much about the disease. And so maybe it was too much fear created by the media. Especially, I think the fear was in like everything that is sexy and has fear and emotions and all that in it is of interest to the media. But I think what we're seeing now
You're being so polite.
What we're seeing now, though, is that some of these measurements, as they were proposed then, are still probably the most effective ones, right? I mean, social distancing, ideally mask, and when you can social distance, I mean, Tony Fauci is still saying those are the best ones, right? And so, I think the quick response, realizing that this is a disease that is different than SARS-1, this one is going to continue to spread. And we were all closely monitoring. And as soon as we saw the first human-to-human transmission outside of China, that's when, for us, it really became a more serious disease. Like, initially it was all just travelers from China going, and so they would take the disease with them. But then the question was, can they now infect others? Mm-hmm. And once that was demonstrated, it was just a matter of time before it would come to Canada. And when it did, then we all were watching how fast it will spread within the country.
And what does your community say to each other as you're sitting in the labs and watching all this? Why don't they just stop the damn flights? Why won't everybody put on a mask? Like, how do you look? We're looking from the outside, where all we're dealing with is the fear and the hype. You're looking at facts.
So we were trying to look at it from a more scientific point of view. What do we know about this disease? How does this compare to SARS-1? How does it compare to other coronaviruses? What can we extrapolate from here to there? What kind of vaccine strategy do we need? What drugs might be available? So I think, we were more focusing on how do we get this thing under control. And until we have it under control, it's really up to the public health experts to come up with these measurements and these recommendations.
We got so many mixed messages about masks, and everybody knows we were trying to preserve the PPE for the health professionals, but it seems to me we should have just been told as a population, go home and get a scarf and put it over your face until we get this. Wouldn't have that been I think easier?
Yeah, maybe. But I think in the beginning, like you said, it was really the issue. We were really, really concerned about our hospitals and our frontline healthcare workers, and even VIDO InterVac. I'm not sure if you were. We're now decontaminating masks for the local hospitals here in Saskatchewan.
So they can reuse.
They can be reused. So we were, again, the first in the country to have that all figured out. It's approved by Health Canada. We decontaminated already over 10,000 masks. So we have students who are coming in, volunteering their time. We use a process that is well characterized, and that is what we're using for our equipment and for our rooms. So again, in the beginning was the fear, we're running out of masks.
Right.
And so then I think the recommendation for people on the street to be careful and not to wear too many so that we have enough for our frontline healthcare workers was a good one. And then we saw that manufacturing was catching up, right? So now there is enough masks available. Well, so now I think it's easier to say to people, go and wear a mask.
Okay, but
I mean, ideally, we would have liked everyone to wear a mask.
Okay, that's sort of what I was...
again, we didn't understand in the beginning how transmission works, and we also didn't want everyone to use up what we had, the stockpiles that we had.
So you're doing this officially and properly for hospitals. What can you tell an ordinary person who has their mask and they carry it around and then they come home from the grocery store, but they want to reuse it? What should they do?
Wash it. Just,
soap
regular laundry or dish soap. I use dish soap at home. Just, like you wash your dishes, squirt off dish soap, warm water, give it a good wash, and it's
do good. That with the reusable, with the blue.
That's right. So the cloth stuff. And if you use some of the other ones, then, maybe don't reuse it too often. Like as soon as you have a feeling that the integrity of the mask is somewhat compromised, don't use it.
Okay, I've kind of sprayed mine a couple of times with Lysol type products, and then I leave it for a couple of days, because I don't want to inhale it. So
and
that
especially if it dries out, completely dries out, like even if you put it on a vent or something in your house, completely dries out, and that dries out the virus and destroys it too.
Just time.
Yeah, time and air, dry air.
Okay, and what about the sun?
Sun is a very effective killer, so if you put it out on the deck, if you can, even better.
Okay, this is very, very helpful. Oh, I want to come back to the virus for a moment, because you were the first and you were jumping on this. And But we're also told about viruses that they mutate every 15 seconds, and they're different in each individuals and in different climates. So what kind of vaccine can you have for a virus that's constantly morphing?
So this one doesn't mutate as much as some of the other viruses. So like influenza, for example, has a much higher mutation rate than this one. We do see, though, already 2 or 3 strains now circulating. And so that's one of the challenges we have now that the sequences are available. We're comparing them and then predicting whether our vaccine still works or not. And so right now, our vaccine would be still okay, but that's what everybody does. And so you're right, as viruses change, vaccines lose their effectiveness. And so you have to keep changing the vaccine to, follow the new viruses that are coming along.
So the DNA sequencing, which everybody said was released early, and that's why there's so much progress already. I think it was the Australians recently even moved to testing on humans. So how do you get a new DNA sequencing sample from somebody?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in these isolates as they're coming in, they're all being sequenced, and there is now big databases where all the new information, all the new isolates are being fed in. And so then you can do comparisons, and you can actually see how within certain regions of the world, certain types are evolving and how they change more towards this and more here over towards that. But those changes, most of them are not affecting those targets that we are targeting with our vaccines. So for now, most vaccines are still good.
Okay, explain that. You're targeting something very base, so it doesn't matter what the window dressing is around it, or?
So the virus has various structures, right? And so one of the structures on its surface, it has this protein that's called the spike protein, because under the microscope, in the coronavirus looks like a corona and has these spikes there. And so the virus uses this spike to attach to your cells at your mucosal surfaces in your lung. And so the cells have a receptor for it, and you need to have a specific interaction with the spike protein in the receptor, and that allows then the virus to attach, and then it can get into the cell. And so this actual interaction here, the receptor and the binding domain on the virus side is fairly small. And so, for it to interact there, it only requires a little piece of the whole genome of the virus. So you can have many, many, many different mutations happening in the other part. If they are not specifically here, they're not really affecting the virus and its ability to attach. And so this protein, the spike protein, is what most vaccine manufacturers currently are targeting. And again, it's a very large protein which can have many, many mutations. The target that we are after is fairly small. And so it's not so affected at the moment by at least the ones that we're using. And as soon as there would be a change, the virus cannot infect anymore. Those mutants would be running out anyway, because they're not able to replicate. So we're good for a little while there for sure.
Almost every day there's a story. This does incredible brain damage. You may never be able to think again. Your lungs are going to look like it's been run over by a tractor tire. All the different variations is there some truth to any of it, or how do we sort through this?
Yeah, so I think this is, again, there is a lot of hype and maybe also misinformation in the media. I don't really think we understand all of those things at the moment. What we know now is that there is, of course, the respiratory stage of the disease, so everything in the lung, and then also the involvement of other systemic organs. And so, there is some issues with your functioning of your blood coagulation, how you control that. There is shutdown of other organs as a result of this inflammatory response, this overreaction of the immune system. But the long-term consequences we don't really understand, and it's way too early to speculate whether it will be causing long-lasting brain damages or any. I think we don't have that information at the moment. The data is not there, and it's all just speculative.
You talk about the when of the next virus, right? When it happens, not if it happens. Yet we're all living in our own economies, whether it's Canada or Sweden or whatever it is, trying to cope. Sweden, for example, didn't shut down. They decided to go with the herd immunity approach, we've shut down with great and grave economic consequences. It's almost impossible when you sit here today and say, we don't know what this is going to look like. We don't know how long it's going to last. How do we find that middle ground of carrying on with life, of having an economy function so that we have even the finances to fund the kind of research that you're doing versus just locking down?
Well, that's a loaded question.
I know it is.
So I think, so there is a number of answers to this. So number one, I think it's the country's recognizing, or in my mind, hopefully the country's recognizing that we need to have organizations like ours to be there when the next pandemic happens, to work on pandemics all the time and be prepared for it. And so part of our research, for example, and I'm really excited about it, we're really trying to change how we make vaccines. At the moment, vaccines are being made, a new pathogen emerges, and then within a year or 12 to 18 months, we come up with a vaccine. And even if we fast track and accelerate, we're trying to essentially catch up to the new disease, right? Can we not use bioinformatics and artificial intelligence to predict what the next pathogen might look like and then make vaccines prior to them emerging? Have them stockpiled, have them ready, and when the next Wuhan outbreak occurs, you could have them coordinated by WHO on an airplane, fly them over there, give 5 million doses to the people right there, and try to contain it. And so that's what at VIDO now, much of our research is focused on. How can we make vaccines now for a pathogen that we don't even know what it may look like?
Okay.
How can we predict?
How can you do that?
Yes, and so the science is there. We're doing it now. We're very excited about it. It's a paradigm shift on how we're doing vaccines and how we're developing them. But I think the science is there. So that's one answer, right? And so you have to have research centers like ours that have long-term stable funding to do this kind of work. And then I think the next question to this is, as a country, we also, in my mind, need to recognize the fact that emerging diseases will happen, right? And so, we all know how it goes through funding cycles. Other priorities come up while this money gets shut down. And so that's a little bit what happened, right? If you go back and over the last 10 years, one of the questions to Obama was, what's your greatest concern? Well, it's the next epidemic, right? Or the next pandemic. And so, I think as a government, as a country, we should almost always put a certain amount of money towards this as, this is our, I don't know what you want to call it, our security fund or something. Yeah. So there's always research going on. There's always manufacturing capacity. Like we let the country allow to essentially lose our manufacturing capacity. It moved away to other countries, right? Or companies buying in and then eventually moving their stuff. So now we're finding ourselves in a situation where we depend on other countries. Well, and even for our own vaccine, I need to go internationally to get some of the components made because in Canada we don't have the capacity.
The components of the vaccine.
Parts of it, yes. And so I think this is, again, so the second answer, we need to support this research. We need to have centers like VIDO InterVac. I really see us becoming Canada's pandemic center in the future. We have the best infrastructure in the world. Now we are recruiting the best minds in the world. This is the place where we specifically can focus on emerging diseases. And then for government to recognize that these things will happen, both on the animal as well on the human side, and there should always be a task force available, money available, infrastructure available, supplies, exactly, like a team. And so we talked about this pandemic preparedness after SARS-1. There were big programs, and then eventually they ran out, and because of other priorities were maybe not supported as much. And so now, boom, the pandemic hits, and we say, oh yeah, didn't we talk about this?
We threw out all those supplies because they were stale dated. No, it's crazy. Well, I hope we've learned our lesson this time in terms of staying ready. You're animal testing this on animals at this point. Others have moved to humans. When will you move to humans, and what does that mean? What humans?
In the fall. So our clinical trials are scheduled for the fall. Right now, we're testing the safety of the vaccine, which is absolutely critical. And then we're also getting clinical grade material manufactured so that we can do the human testing. Like you have to do the testing in humans with essentially very, very clean material, GMP material. And that is currently being manufactured, parts of it even outside of the country. And, those materials come in, then we do the safety testing, and then we're going into clinical trials in October.
And how do you find the humans? Which ones are they? People who've had the disease, people who haven't?
You'd be surprised. We have had people contacting us from all across the country, from the West Coast to all the way Halifax, people volunteering. They've heard about us in the news. They want to be part of the vaccine studies. There is no shortage of volunteers for the phase 1 trials, which essentially
That's amazing.
is just looking at, is it safe? So is there any unwanted reactions to the vaccine? No issue. And so we're doing this in Halifax. There's the Canadian Centre for Vaccinology, a group who is really specialized on this, like the other 2 vaccines that are going forward right now. And there is no shortage and no problem finding volunteers right now.
And they've got to be people who have not been...
Yeah, so the regulator defines that. Initially, we're starting with a middle age group, so 18 to 55 years, adults, volunteers. And then as we enroll and see the data coming out and it's safe, we move older people in and so on, and so eventually cover the whole spectrum.
There's always these questions. I mean, we know, for example, old folks' homes, retirement homes were hit hard. And so you always assume that the elderly are more vulnerable just because of their systems. But it was younger people bringing it in who might have been working at 2 or 3 institutions. It's hard to say which is chicken and egg on this one. What's your view?
Well, I think it's... the way it looks is this disease manifests itself more severely in the elderly. So, younger people are probably not getting as sick, although there is exceptions. But, on average, it's the elderly that is getting sicker. So the risk is that younger people take the virus into these facilities, and then because of the close proximity of all these people, and then also some of them, their immune compromised status, that's a great breeding ground for the virus to cause problems. And so that's why with this particular virus, the old folk homes are a little bit of the highest risk, if you want. But other diseases target, younger people or kids. It's not always the elderly.
How do you live your life? Would you get on a plane and go back to Germany to visit family? When you go to the grocery store, do you wear a mask, gloves? How do you deal?
So I used to travel at least 25%, if not 30% of my time. So I traveled all around the world. I haven't traveled since January, and I would not. I do wear a mask, so at work we wear masks, and even coming here I wear a mask up to the hotel. So when I can, I wear a mask, and especially if I know that I won't be able to social distance, I wear a mask to protect others. How do I live my life otherwise? Well, I have 3 small children, and so they're all asking me, when is this coronavirus over, so that they can go back to normal life. And so hockey just started again in the province. My son had his first game on Sunday, and we go camping, and like we had a trip to Europe planned this summer, so now we go camping. So it's we make do with what it is.
And schools in September, will you send your kids to school?
Oh yeah, they will go to school. I think the way the situation is in Saskatchewan right now, we're really one of the regions in the country where we have very low caseloads. So I think it's justified that the kids are going to school.
I want to ask you about that, because you've been here for 20 years, but you came from Germany. Why are we doing well? Is it just because we're only 1 million people and we're kind of socially distanced? People live on farms or in rural areas, or is there something else? Are we more compliant than most? What accounts for it?
I think it's a combination of all of those. So I think because we're an agriculture province, many of us have farm roots or are farmers themselves. So number one, we understand the importance of infectious diseases, right? So working with animals, livestock, you understand the impact infectious diseases can have. Secondly, it's a large province and a few people only. So people, like you said, are spread out. But you still have Saskatoon and so on. Yeah. So there, I think it's really people, again, are compliant, following the public health guidelines. They make sense, so it's like common sense. And maybe it's because we're a prairie province with a lot of farmers. Common sense, right? I mean, if you can wear a mask, wear a mask. If you can avoid large gatherings, avoid them, right? Exactly. So I think it's much easier. And then if you think about public transport and so on, we don't rely on like Toronto or New York subways that are crowded with people. So like the combination of all of these things.
The other thing that strikes me, and I know all provinces have done it, it seemed here we had a plan. Okay, this is bad. We know this is the real thing, and it's going to cause a lot of trouble. We're going to do this in stages. There's stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and 3.6 and 3.8, and I think it kind of gave people a plan, so that they didn't have to think about forever. My life has been changed. I mean, our lives might forever be changed, but I think the communication is really, really crucial to this.
Oh yeah. I think what we're seeing in Canada, and then specifically here in Saskatchewan, good leadership, good communication, clear communication. We're in this phase right now. This is what it means. Then we move to the next phase, and this is what it means, and so on. If you compare that to the U.S., every state is doing their own thing. People are confused. They're getting mixed messages. Yeah. I think our messaging is very clear. And even if we don't know, like in the beginning, like you said, with a mask, I mean, maybe we were too slow recommending to people to wear a mask. But as soon as the data was there, recommendation was made, wear a mask, right? And so I think communication leadership is much clearer, much easier to understand than it is maybe in other parts of the world.
Well, thank you for being one of those
Thanks
clear
for having me.
Communicators. You've actually made me feel better, even though you're saying that, we're going to see way more of these things. This is not the last.
This is not the only one.
Oh, boy. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Really nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Communication really is important. That actually made me feel better. Dr. Volker Gerdts, he's with VIDO InterVac. He's a research scientist, of course, at the University of Saskatchewan's Vaccine and Infectious Disease Organization. This is really a lot of the first in the world in terms of their work and insights onto a vaccine. So we wish them all the best.